Hey, Hunter Hastings here. As business barrels along in the fast-changing digital world, the very nature of work has changed. How we do work, where we do work, when we do work, and especially how we synchronize work with each other. The new factory and the new office is called the hybrid workplace. And all of the old concepts that we used to use to manage business have changed. In fact, the whole concept of management needs to be replaced. We need something new. Happily, we have two of the best experts to help us think this through. Julie Kantor and Felice Ekelman.
This is the Value Creators Podcast. Value creation is the sole purpose of any business and every business, and for all of us as entrepreneurs. Listen to great value creators as they share their successes, trials, and lessons learned. Join us as we explore how to think as value creators, how to act as value creators, and how to view business through the lens of value creation.
Julie is a business psychologist, consultant, and an entrepreneur. She's the founder of JP Kantor Consulting, and she's an expert in organizational change. Felice is a principal at Jackson Lewis PC, one of the largest law firms, practicing workplace law on behalf of management. She's a leader in both legal strategy and business strategy. Together, they are co-authors of a book that will form the background of our discussion today, Thrive with a Hybrid Workplace, Step-by-Step Guidance from the Experts. Felice and Julie, welcome to the Value Creators Podcast.
Great to be here.
Hi, Hunter. Great to be here.
Thank you for being here. We're going to talk about your book. It's called Thrive with a Hybrid Workplace. And you're providing employers and firms with a step-by-step, it seems to me, guidance on leading and managing in a new phenomenon we're calling hybrid working. You take a systems view of it, and so we're going to pursue that kind of approach. Julie, you're a business psychologist. I think you'll tell us about that. You're a consultant, you're an executive coach, you're an advisor. You're thinking about productivity and team dynamics and processes, those kinds of things. And then, Felice, you're a workplace lawyer. So you're thinking about legal and business strategies, compliance, things like discrimination and diversity and equity and business risk like that. So you two come together and you take this highly integrated viewpoint, which I think is a huge addition to our understanding. So I thought we'd start at the old system, the one we're replacing. How did that come about? How did we decide that everybody had to commute to an office and be together and waste all that amount of time? And I remember doing it. It seems kind of bizarre now that we look back on it. So did you think about the old system before you thought about the new one?
I would say so too. Is sort of our point of our book is we just sort of went on automatic pilot in how we lived. Interesting question. I think, how do we get to it? We got it from General Motors' built cars, and everybody had to show up at General Motors and put the assorted parts on. And I think we erroneously assumed all the time that we had to come to the same place. And that's probably a fundamental question that we address throughout the book is we're not making cars, but what are we making? And do we need to come together?
Well, the other thing is that the old way was the pre-technology way. And we can talk about what is technology. I mean, the fax machine was technology. The advent of technology, which enables so many knowledge workers to perform work somewhere other than in the brick and mortar building with their colleagues, is really what enabled this transition. And it had been happening, but of course we all know that the pandemic and the shutdowns in most of this country is what really accelerated the reality that work did not have to be the old way.
Yeah, we'll talk about that briefly, I think, although post-pandemic is more of our focus. But one of the thoughts that came to my mind, you mentioned it in the book too, is that we came up with this idea of work-life balance, right? You spend some portion, maybe the major portion of your time commuting and being in the office and being in meetings, and you come home and you have a different life, which it became work-life balance. And we decided there was too much work and not enough life. Did we think about work-life balance as kind of a rationalization of this old system, or did we develop it through dissatisfaction? Why did we come up with work-life balance as opposed to it's all work or it's all life?
I would actually tie it back to the 1990s and prior. I actually did my dissertation on dual career couples, where, years ago, right, it was typically that the woman stayed home and the father went to work. And when women entered the workforce, what happened is started to have the integration of your personal life and your work. So they started looking at how were they interfacing. And I think that was probably the first time that people started to look at just the concept of interface. And you use the word work-life balance. I personally describe work-life balance as, does it align with your values? And on one stream, you have working parents who want to be whatever, succeeding, however they want to do it, but it requires a lot of time, quote unquote, working. And so if they are spending time commensurate with that, because that's their value, then that is work-life balance. On the other hand, if you have people, and honestly, it turns into women mostly, who want to advance their career and they're fine raising healthy children with having a nanny, that's alignment, even if it's not a 50-50.
Yeah, I think it goes beyond that, Hunter. I think when we were talking about the new age approach to work, when we talked about startup culture and work-life balance, was about not working 24/7. So I think it was beyond, although obviously caregivers and women in particular were part of the impetus to recognition that there needs to be work-life balance. I think in the last boom, we were dealing with situations where folks were working all the time and questioning the appropriateness of that.
Yeah. Well, let's just finish the history. So we had these dual pathways, if you like, of technology development and let's call it attitude development. We might call it culture later on in our conversation, or values, as you say. But the pandemic came. What did the pandemic came? Did it accelerate, or what did it change? Did it accelerate the technology? Did it change attitudes, or a bit of both? How did the post-pandemic look different than the pre-pandemic?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think certainly the use of platforms like the one we're on, we're not in the same room, we're not recording in a studio together. The ease at which one could continue to have contact and visual contact really became apparent during the pandemic. I mean, these platforms existed, but they were not in use to the same extent, I think, during the pandemic. But I also think the speed at which everyone migrated away from an office and jobs that we never thought can be performed remotely now are. And so that opened everyone's eyes to the possibility of approaching work differently, approaching white collar work differently, because as we all know, during the pandemic, there were many people who had to continue to report to work in a physical place. Think healthcare, hospitality, teachers, all those folks.
I think if you also connect your point about work-life balance and what Felice is talking in terms of about our ability to work, technology has moved us. When we were in lockdown, there was no choice in terms of you were working in your home, literally. And so what does it look like to have time where, number one, there were no boundaries? So on one hand, you had people who were working a lot. And what we saw when it was really in shutdown, people were really working because there just wasn't anything to do. There were no movies open. You couldn't go to restaurants. And what happened over time is the world opened up. We had learned this skill and this integration of personal life and work. And being totally honest, and the data is still out there, but people aren't working as hard. And so are they at the end of the day just as productive? I don't know. I can tell you my bias in stealing from leaders. The answer is starting to be realized is no. But this is where the question is, you have people, well, maybe we don't have to work as hard. Maybe we shouldn't be. If you look at the data in the beginning of when they were measuring, quote unquote, productivity, they were saying, Hunter, if you work at home, are you as productive as you are when you go into the office? Felice, are you, we always say yes, of course. And now when we went into this book a fair amount, is now they have to look at measuring productivity in a very different way.
Yeah, so that gives us the opportunity, Julie, to enter this third dimension, which is after the pandemic, the bosses, let's use that term, decided they were nervous about productivity or they wanted more control. I want people back in the office. And so that was a post-pandemic kind of a phenomenon. There was some pushback because people like working at home. Maybe they like being less productive. I don't know, but you'll tell us. But is that this desire for command and control? That's a third dimension against technology and culture that complicates things, right? So who's that a problem for? Just the bosses, the top of the organization?
I would say initially it worked from this association, the premise that if you're sitting in your seat, you're being more productive. And the other piece is that that's what people knew, right? We knew what it was like to work 9 to 5. There clearly was a sense of this command and control, but that's when the initial piece came. And also when you had, and it's a lot with the large banks, they said, come in, and people just didn't come in. They literally just didn't come in. And part of it was tied to economy was such that it was an employee market. So they didn't have to. They knew they were hot commodities. And what we've seen over time is there is, in fact, reason to come in beyond a command and control.
Well, we'll get to those reasons in a second. Felice, what's the thinking of control and thinking of the legal issues? How do you see that?
There is a different playbook now, because before the migration to work from home out of health necessity to protect the health of an organization's employees, it was easy for leaders to say everyone must be in the office because that's the only way a job can be performed. And in the book, I talk about the EEOC's first case post-pandemic, where they evaluate an accommodation, a disability accommodation request from an employee to work from home more frequently than the directive from the employer. And what that case tells us, and that case settled, and our clients, the employers of this country, are navigating how to deal with workplace accommodations in a whole new arena where one can no longer say that job has always been done in the office, therefore it has to be done in the office. And so employers have to, for legal reasons, consider their policies and their approaches very differently.
Let's baseline it, because we're going to go through your 7 C's of leadership in the hybrid workplace. But do we need to define where it is today? What's the baseline today? When I say hybrid work, is there an average or a style or a model, or is it all over the place?
It's my sense, again, I work with employers all over the country in different industries. My sense is there is a brand new flexibility as to where work is performed. And whether it is a situation where teams include remote workers, that's hybrid, and then folks who come to an office, that's a hybrid team. Mostly when we think of hybrid work, we think of somebody who commutes a little bit, who comes to the office some of the time, but not all of the time. From what we read, downtowns are not full 5 days a week. And so there's all kinds of data points, whether it's traffic, commuting, anecdotes, policies that we understand employers are promulgating. There is a high degree of hybrid work policies and approaches in place right now in all kinds of industries and throughout, I would say, the US.
I mean, I think we would agree that the 9 to 5, and for many knowledge workers, it was a lot more than 9 to 5, but the Monday to Friday 9 to 5 model with no flexibility, I think that is gone. And part of that will translate to some people are Monday through Thursday. What I see is that employers are shifting. In the beginning, we had sort of this tit for tat. Are we 2 days versus 3 days in the office? And we can talk about what I call it, whether just picking the number is a silly policy. But I'm seeing that employers are starting to push that envelope to be 3 and 4, because in fact, there is a difference for many reasons of people, the difference in terms of and the reason for people coming into the office. I think that people coming in probably, I don't know what the statistic is, but I'm just going to guess 25% of staff coming in on Fridays is probably pretty standard. I mean, at this point, a organization that has a Monday to Thursday in office and Friday working from home, they're not necessarily calling that hybrid, but it's hybrid.
You make an interesting point in the book, and you've emphasized it here, is hybrid is not just where work is done, it's when work is done. The time that we do work has changed in some way, right? It can be done any time in the 24 hours. And that's part of hybrid.
For certain groups of employees, so without getting bogged down in legal morass, there are some employees that still have to be paid by the hour who can work on a hybrid basis. And for those folks, employers have to pay particular attention to when they're working. It's work whenever you want is going to run into compliance issues. But when we think about knowledge workers, we're thinking of folks who are at a fairly high level who do have the ability to perform their work, not necessarily linked to a schedule.
In terms of the when, and even with the technology, and that's when we need to do things synchronously versus asynchronously. You could read this book whenever you wanted. We could write the book whenever we wanted independently. We couldn't have this meeting at any time. And I think that's the piece where we have the issue of the technology, the flexibility, but organizations need to determine how much do we need to do things at the same time.
Yeah. We're in quantum land here. There's multiple dimensions. Where, when, and when it's synchronized. Let's use your 7Cs framework. You introduced that in the book. It's a new framework for me, and it was a very useful way to think about some of these challenges. The first one is culture, that we've got to get the culture right for these hybrid workplaces and everything that we've talked about. I'm a bit skeptical about culture. It seems to me like a manufactured idea from the business schools. And to be fair to you both, you expressed that same kind of skepticism when you introduced the word culture. So tell us what you're thinking. How are you going to create a culture for the hybrid workplace?
Well, I would say first, frequently culture, let's go back to where we started this conversation about work-life balance. I would think now frequently, and I think it's minimized, if you ask a lot of employees, what is culture? The first thing they will tell you is about the work-life balance. But I will personally propose that culture is a whole lot more than that. You're absolutely right. Culture is this amorphous thing. But to me, the biggest factor about culture is when organization identifies who they are, their mission, what they stand for, and then how they live their day to day is really where we have what culture looks like. And so is it an organization where they say things like, we respect life, work-life balance, so we respect, diverse thinking, certain things you certainly hear in cultures. Well, is your boss emailing you at 12:30 at night and in fact expecting a response at 12:30 at night? Not creating a culture which is as respectful as they're saying that it is. And so culture ultimately boils down to actually very concrete things, is how people feel the culture. Like I said, in terms of, is it respectful, right? In terms of just, let's take concrete about the time. I don't really respect your time if I'm emailing you at 12:30 and asking you to write me back. If you look at things like organization, and I'm going to step into Felice's world, and she'll certainly take it over, about respect and diversity. But then you look at the hiring patterns, and Felice, you want to finish this sentence for me?
Well, you can't respect diversity if you don't have diverse voices. So one requires the other. And what we try to emphasize throughout the book is that employers want to be an employer of choice. They want to be an organization that people want to work for. And what makes one organization a better employer than another? A lot of different things. Some people will tell you, money and benefits. Others will tell you opportunity for growth. Others will tell you great leadership. But whatever it is, that all boils down to culture, what makes your organization different in your industry than every other. So that's how I look at it. And when I advise employers about, how to be an employer of choice, in other words, have an issue-free workplace, understanding the needs of employees for flexibility and work-life balance is part of that equation. And it's not that you can't have culture when you have folks reporting to an office less frequently than 5 days a week, just as you can have a crappy culture with everyone reporting 5 days a week. It's almost like, I don't know how you feel, Julie, but culture is less about where work is performed, but more about the ethos of the organization.
And I think that this ties to also your concept when you're referring to command and control. And this rolls into creating a culture in the hybrid workplace. So if you say you have to be in on Mondays and Tuesdays, period, end of story, in part because, quite honestly, I play golf on Wednesdays, but that's a sentence. Or people who worse say you have to be in 2 days a week, and I come in on Wednesdays and Felice comes in on Thursday. If I've never seen her, then what's the point? And so this is where you get this translation. And a big thing we talk about in the book is in terms of this intentionality is when people are coming in matters. It's not just coming in for certain days. And so the culture is, if it's just you have to come in, there's command and control, but there's no reason to come in, it doesn't create a great culture.
You had a really interesting way of defining culture that I hadn't seen before, but it really resonated with me, which is it's the value proposition of why you work here. And we deal in value propositions all the time with customers. You make a promise and you keep that promise, and it represents who you are. And I like that thought. Here's the value proposition for working here. We want you to love it.
And are you going to live it?
Yeah. That was really nice.
And it makes sense for employers to pay attention to this because it's competitive out there. Talent is hard to get and even harder to keep. And so every employer should be thinking about this in a big way.
Yeah. It makes me think, I spent a lot of time in the consulting industry, and the whole point about consulting was you didn't come into the office. You went to your client's office. That was the culture. That was the value proposition. And what the hell are you doing in the office? You're supposed to be somewhere else. So that works. So the second C in your list is change. We talk about this all the time in innovation and entrepreneurship, constant change, continuous change, disruptive change. There's a famous expression called VUCA. The world is volatile, uncertain, complex, I think, and whatever the A is. That's the normal state of things. But the other side of the coin is people hate change. They'd like everything to be the same all the time. So tell us about change. How are we managing change? Because I presume hybrid is changing all the time, every day, how we define it.
It is. And one of the things, I'll let Julie take this in a second, but it is okay, employers, to change your hybrid policy. If it's not working for you, tweak it, recalibrate. And because the world changes, it's good to step back and reevaluate. And it's not an admission that we were wrong and they were right. It's an acknowledgement that, the world is constantly evolving and the world of the workplace is changing really fast. I know you have a lot to say about this, Julie.
Push the button. I will try to tail it back. But basically, it goes through this word we talked about in terms of intentionality. People are assuming, as I say, I had a job helping people lead and advising before COVID, and now leaders need help on steroids. And the problem is that many people were assuming that previous ways of working will still continue to work. And so part of the piece is really examining what was working, that we need to figure out how it needs to work differently versus what really wasn't working. And so we really need to change it. And, the fact of the matter is some people, some organizations just fundamentally, and again, this is not even just hybrid, but fundamentally, desire, tolerate, value change more than others. So if you look at more traditional models, changing is harder than one who, by definition, 10 where everything's scrappy and we're changing all the time. The cement isn't as dry. And so the beginning piece of change is accepting you've got to change.
Yeah, easy to say, but hard to do. Let's go back to the culture. How do you create a culture change, Julie?
Well, look, it inevitably starts with the top. So it's hybrid. Are they going to sit in the command and control world? And they're saying, yes, I respect diversity and flexibility, but they're not changing. So let's take this value proposition. So if a value proposition is connection, which I can tell you any organization I run will tell you that, you can't connect in the same way. And so how are we going to build connections in ways that are different? So one of the things, again, intersection, Felice was talking about in terms of the real estate. So people are coming into the office less frequently. And so if you still value connection as a culture, so how might you do it differently? You'll want to cut down my real estate. So what I'm hearing more and more clients doing, the money that we're saving in real estate as we cut down our imprint, we're going to spend on taking people off site to gather together because this is value. So again, you take a value and you have to live it differently.
You mentioned connection. You call it in the book interpersonal glue, a nice expression. That's how we all develop our culture, right? We're interpersonally glued together. In the digital world, everything's connected to everything. So if we're digital natives, as more and more of the young people are, we live in that world. We're always connected. So what's so special about this kind of connection? How are you highlighting connection particularly, as opposed to just digital connection? Here we are on Zencastr.
Well, for starters, some of it's about face to face. That there is, at the end of the day, there is something that's different when we're sitting in the same room, or you see people that you're building relationships with, and it's, you get to know them, and you're literally able to give them a hug, literally or figuratively. And how do you make those connections? It is not the same. You can't get the same kind of serendipity of connection when you're doing it in a virtual way. So even something as rapid as YouTube and Twitter and all those things, it is still moment by moment. It's not a flowing connection. And the piece in terms of connection and the word interpersonal glue, the highlight is interpersonal, right? But I'm talking about work. And so I believe the three of us have some personal connection, and then we're working on a project where there's a lot of contention for assorted reasons. We're going to work through that. If we don't have any personal connection, we're going to have a harder time working through that work process, which is why it's so fundamental.
So the part of the connection you're saying is humanness, right? It's the part you can't do digitally. There's a little button at the bottom of my screen that says, give Julie a hug. I could do that.
That is sort of the point of the book, please. Note that.
Yeah.
You don't
Yeah.
advise hugging, Felice, right? That's
No,
legally questionable.
speaking, figuratively or literally, because not everybody takes it the same way, except that if you actually know somebody, they'll interpret that the way you think they're going to interpret it. Again, I'm not advising that there should be hugging in the workplace, but people misunderstand one another when they don't know one another. And there are so many misunderstandings when we get to the communication piece, when you use the wrong communication vehicle. I mean, look, we've all had this situation where you've had emails or Slacks with someone and you're talking past one another. And if you just pick up the phone and say, hey, what do you think? This is what I'm trying to say. It's like, eureka. We've been talking past one another because we're speaking in bullets as opposed to sentences or paragraphs. So that's, knowing someone helps improve the quality of communication, as Julie is just saying, and collaboration. But also, I think it limits the possibility of conflict in the workplace. And again, I'm a lawyer. I represent employers, and often I'm called upon to address issues of conflict in the workplace. And often it's a lot of miscommunication. I mean, yes, there's bad behavior, but there's often miscommunication.
Let's get to communication. You subsume what Julie already mentioned, intentionality in there. You call it say as you do and do as you say. But I find in digital communication that I work very hard at the precision of language, which I might not do in verbal communication. So can't I make the case that digital communication is more precise? You can understand me better?
No, I would say just the opposite, actually.
Okay.
Because what happens, and was what Felice was referring to, when I send you an email or you send me a Slack or an IM, I don't have any of your tone, which is why I joke and I say I wish emojis would become business standard. They're sort of funky. You don't use them now, but they are the attempt to put the emotion on there. And so the classic that I hear that you see is if you have a leader who talks, report due at 5. I mean, literally, I've had this happen. The report is due on Monday at 5. And this is somebody who had a contentious relationship with their boss. And he was like, look, I have this command and control boss. And I said, I read it. And I said, the report's due at 5. So that's it. So in fact, that was really clear communication. So what happens with written is you just have the words. What happens when you pick up the phone, as Felice says, refer to, is you add the tone. So you can tell if somebody's mad at you or not when they're talking over the phone, or how you're joking, right? And then you add video to it, you get facial expressions. You can see when you're in a big meeting and somebody's spacing out and they're checking out, you have the video. So as you add more of the different dimensions of communication, it actually gets clearer.
Okay. So again, it's the humanness, it's the facial expressions, the tone, and things like that. Yeah. Okay. And then that spills over into collaboration, which is the reason we do all of this. And you say that's the biggest challenge. The same theme: technology is useful, but the interpersonal chemistry of like a shared creative brainstorming or something is something you can't do with the technology. So tell us about collaboration. Is it getting worse?
Well, I would say that one of the other themes we talk about in the book is the need for organizations to train their managers and supervisors about how to manage well in this new environment. And that is mostly to ensure that there is still collaboration when it's not in person all the time. And making those collaborative moments meaningful is something that, may need to be taught. And so, I read a survey recently where employees were critical of the way that their organizations were handling hybrid work and put the blame on the fact that leadership doesn't know how to lead on a day-to-day basis when not everyone's there and when moments together are precious. And so training and understanding the different ways to use technology, but also, using, as is discussed in the book, you might just check in on your employees. I'm in the office and Julie's at home today, but I might just check on all the folks who report to me by walking down the hall, peeking in. It's Monday. What do you have going on? Are you set for the week? Do you need anything from me as this week begins? Because we're talking on a Monday. How do you transition that kind of opportunity for collaboration and leadership when I'm not in the office?
I think this is the piece that, again, this theme of intentionality and connection, that they need to be more mindful about this. To some degree, we've been talking about collaboration, pretty much this whole session, whether it's about timing, but another burden on leaders, they have to think about, how much do I have to collaborate, right? So if you look at, Felice is a senior partner at the firm, right? So Felice's got independent work she has to do. She's also responsible for training people. So the independent work that she's got to do, she obviously can do whenever and wherever, but she can't always be training and mentoring people. You have to think about, as a leader, or you get into creative services. So my clients are architects building skyscrapers. How much do they need to be in the same room, in the same building versus not? They need to be together a lot. And so employers need to think about, is it 4 days a week they need to be together, 2 days? And that's what we're saying, intentionality. Leaders are just not used to thinking about those kinds of things.
So one of the words you use in your 7 C's is coaching. So I'm fascinated by that word. It seems to be becoming more in use recently. And I'm wondering, does it displace management? Does it displace leadership? Is it a different form of behavior for those higher up in the organization to help those lower down in the organization. Tell me about coaching. What are you thinking? Is that a big piece of hybrid?
Well, I think fundamentally it's the responsibility of every manager to, in essence, teach, train their employees. Right. That is fundamentally what managers need to do. And so, again, moving from a more proactive thinking about what you need to develop an employee, help them learn, as well as just being there reactively. And what you see, even technology, how are some organizations trying to create that kind of, Felice, you got a quick question? Can I stop by your office? And some are creating huddle rooms, right? Where it's a virtual, basically we would leave this Zoom meeting on all day or for a certain hour, and we'd all be working. And then if you had a question, I'd lift off or I'd ping you. They usually do it so that you can actually work. And I have a quick question. So people are trying to figure out how to do this moment to moment coaching. I think the other piece, which is especially true with generations entering the workforce, is they are concerned about their own development. Independent of what the organization needs, they want to know how they are going to be growing as an individual. And that takes coaching of a manager, a leader, to working one-on-one with them to help them develop.
One of the definitions I saw of coaching, which I liked, was that I can't necessarily teach you skills you don't have, but I can help you be more mature or evolve in your use of them. And that seems like a appropriate use of the word coaching. I like that thought. I'm not better than you, but I think
it's also teaching people a way to think and a way to ask questions. I mean,
yeah.
You must live with that with your younger folks all the time.
The whole idea of coaching, maybe that's a new component of management. I just hear it more emphasized these days than other forms of management, other forms of leadership. I like it a lot. So part of coaching, you said, is goal setting. And you used a term called SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. My hope was to suggest to you that all of those are out of date. They're very command and control-y. And today we think less of specific numerical goals and more of more general aims. One of them is, let's have more well-being in the workplace. And how do we attain that? So can I push back on SMART, and have you tell me why I'm wrong to push back?
Well, you're assuming is that the manager is setting all the goals, fundamentally SMART goal. And so it's not command if as a coach, let's put you in the coaching role, that you're saying, I'm saying, I want to grow in this company. I want to be promoted. So, okay, what does that mean? Let's get specific about that. And then goals, which is really true, where you have people who are entering organizations and the first thing they want to know is when they're going to get promoted. Well, yeah, that's a goal, but let's get specific about it. Let's get realistic about it. And so it's command and control of you tell me them. It's not command control. It's a framework for somebody to look at their future and make it happen.
I remember when I was a young, wet behind the ears guy in marketing, and I wanted to be the first to be promoted from assistant brand manager to brand manager. And I wasn't, so I failed. But I would have been smarter to say, hey, I want to be good enough to get promoted. I want to have all that knowledge. So that's where I'm coming from.
If you would have asked what you needed to do, you might have gotten the recipe.
That's right. Yeah. So you mentioned productivity early on, and you said maybe we're not as productive as we used to be. You had some ways of boosting productivity, which I thought were very qualitative, not quantitative. They were about clarifying values and aligning them and those kinds of things. So talk to me about productivity in the hybrid workplace.
I think many leaders are struggling with how to measure the productivity of knowledge workers for whom you can't readily use quantitative outcomes as one or even the only measure. And presence used to be the clearest sign of productivity. If you stayed in the office late and were here all the time and showed up early, you must be working really hard and you must be productive because you're here. And now we can't readily discern who's here. And I think one of the coaching focuses has to be for leaders to communicate, well, what is excellence in performance, and communicate that to their team so that their team understands what it is they're trying to achieve. So there's a lot of struggle in some organizations, and I keep looking for any data that demonstrates that productivity has decreased or increased as a result of the proliferation of hybrid work. And so far, I'm seeing that, there is no great clear answer. There are reports that say productivity is increased, reports that are saying productivity decreases, and I think it just depends. I don't think, we can say that people are less productive when they're away from each other or that they're more productive. I think we have to look at each situation separately, and what organizations have to do is stop worrying about everybody else and start focusing on their own teams and what do they need to make them more productive, and how do you know whether they are more or less productive. Obviously, responsiveness is one thing. I send you an email, I ask you to respond immediately. It's 4 hours later. What was that person doing for 4 hours? Or maybe they weren't at their computer when they were supposed to be. Okay, so that's one indicator that something's awry. Usually it's not quite that obvious, although Julie keeps telling me of stories uh, in her experiences where employees are completely unresponsive, and that's certainly the first indication that they're not working.
So let's just touch on compliance since we have you here, Felice, and you're a little bit more focused on that. Is there a greater, what I call compliance load in the hybrid workplace? Is it harder as an employer to be compliant? Are there more rules or more things?
Yeah, there can be. So, if your employees are working principally from home and not reporting to an office, the employee may be covered by the laws, and that home is in a different state. The laws of the state where their home sits might be applicable to that particular employee instead of the laws of the state that they report to. There's also compliance issues when there's all these new laws requiring wage transparency in job offers. And we just had an amendment here in New York where if an employee reports to someone in New York, then that employer has to comply with the New York law with respect to posting for that job, even though the employee does not, or the prospective employee does not have to sit in New York. And because so much about workplace law is not national, it is local, that can inadvertently place burdens on employers and, trigger issues if the employers are not aware of these state law nuances. So that's one compliance issue. The other compliance issue, and we alluded to it earlier, is how do you measure hours worked for employees who are not exempt and who have to be paid for each hour that they work and who have to maintain time records, accurate time records of hours worked. So, if I don't see the employee walk through the door and then take an hour for lunch, I don't know how much that employee is or isn't working. And so that's another compliance arena that has to be dealt with. The other compliance issues have to do with how the hybrid work policy is being implemented. I alluded to disability and accommodations. There are laws, federal, state, and local laws, which require employers to accommodate employees' requests for deviation from a policy about reporting to an office, and there's risk in not complying with those laws. But to the extent an employer has two sets of rules, one set of rules for the favored employees and one set of rules for the less favored employees having nothing to do with legal obligations, if an employer does not enforce its hybrid work policy consistently, those inconsistencies themselves can lead to litigation and allegations of discrimination. So is not insurmountable, but employers have to be intentional in understanding what the implications of their policies and rules are.
Charles Koch, the chairman of Koch Industries, has a rule about what he calls 10,000% compliance, which is 100% compliant 100% of the time. And it sounds like that's getting harder, Felice.
It's getting more complex and
Yeah,
requires a
yeah.
lot of sophistication and, again, intentionality and thought. And so employers really do need to be cognizant of all those issues as they implement and modify policies about where work is performed.
I love your emphasis on intentionality. You know, it's a complex subject in philosophy. Where does it come from? Do we really have it? Is it a sense? Is it an action? Anyway, I'm deviating. I wanted to jump to the future, and Julie, maybe you can lead us there. So this is all changing. We understand that. We'll stop calling it hybrid because it'll just be normal, and the technology will get better and better. We'll teach it empathy. I promise you, we'll teach it empathy, and it'll be able to give us a hug. So, what do you see for the future? One of the business models that we like to study is, I can't say it properly, is Ren Den Hoi, the Chinese business model, where everything is massively decentralized. Every individual employee is responsible for creating value. The value is created through relationships and connections, and now we're all digitally connected. So the whole concept of creating value might change. But that's my speculation. Where are we going, Julie? What will it look like in a few years' time?
Well, to some degree, I don't know. I think that is fundamentally where everybody. I mean, our book went to press in May of 2022, and it was published in March of this year. And in that interim, Felice and I did not know if it came out, if it was still going to be relevant. We didn't know, were we going to go back to 9 to 5, 5 days a week. So that's clearly not in the case. I do believe that organizations are going to be moving more the concept of connection, and the connection between that and productivity, I think, is becoming more and more clear. What organizations are going to be trying to figure out is how to, like I said, cut down your real estate footprint, invest in pulling people to go to Miami for the week or weekend or what have you, whatever your pleasure is, but also just in technology getting better all the time. I mean, you have mirror boards, which are, for people to be on the same time, literally working like on a whiteboard in a synchronous way. So technology is clearly, and I think the other piece is going to be, and again, it's clearly more a generational piece, that people who are younger than the three of us on this call are saying, "Why are you working so much?" And there's some, I'm sure all of us have put in way more any hours that we sat down and we'd say, I don't know if we should have been doing that. So I think that that's also going to land where the concept of this integration of work, home, and personal, right? You see a lot more talk about mental health. So this whole integration, we are here, that is not going to go away. And I think what it looks like in terms of the integration, one of my architect clients said something to me. He said, we worked on, during COVID, we brought work home. And he said, now our buildings is the homes bringing to work. And so you're seeing a lot more trees in buildings, a lot more, warm in couches, couch, those kinds of things. And I think that's here to stay. It's what this integration is going to look like. That the specifics are unknown, but that integration is going to continue.
Predicting the future is not what I do for a living, but I am a student of the workplace, having, been a management side employment lawyer for many decades. And I have to tell you that this is a huge opportunity for employers. It's a huge opportunity for employers to differentiate their organizations from others and to really, really buy into this concept of how can I be flexible? And that includes the 4-day work week. I mean, there's a lot of talk about change in the workplace. How can I be flexible? How can I demonstrate to my employees that I trust them? Because trust is the foundation of just about everything. And so employers who figure this out will really be the best in class.
Yeah, that's a nice thought. Thank you. So your book is called Thrive with a Hybrid Workplace. We'll link to that. The key word is thrive. I think that's what you just touched on, Felice, that how can we get people to thrive and customers to thrive and bosses to thrive and the business to thrive. I like that thought a lot. Is there anywhere else you'd like us to point people to, your personal websites?
My website's juliekantor.com.
And I'm FeliceEkelman.com. Easy to find.
Good. Okay. We'll put a link to that in our knowledge capsule, which we produce after every show. So
we appreciate feedback from our readers. So please let us know what you think, because we keep thinking about this.
Yeah. Well, I think your book is still massively relevant. It really challenged my thinking as I read it. And I look forward to the next one, which won't say hybrid, right? It'll say something else. Evolve to something else. Good. So Julie and Felice, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was great talking with you.
This has been another episode of the Value Creators Podcast. Thanks for listening. You can visit thevaluecreators.com for links and resources related to this episode. And check out hunterhastings.com for more content on entrepreneurial business management based on value creation principles.